I don't know.
Want to arm wrestle?
I went back there and thought, what have I done? Who did I become? Hollywood taught the world to see Sally Field as warmth itself, the smile, the voice, the roles that felt safe, comforting, familiar. She became the face of resilience long before the word was fashionable. But behind that image lived a quiet reckoning few ever noticed. The applause never protected her from the people standing beside her on set. While fans celebrated her victories, Sally was privately asking herself how success had come with so much pain attached. For decades, she played along, smiled through it, and kept her disappointments locked away. That silence wasn't weakness, it was survival. Only now, in the later chapters of her life, has she begun to pull back the curtain. What she revealed wasn't gossip or bitterness, it was memory, names, moments, wounds that never healed. Some of the men involved were Hollywood royalty, praised for their talent and charm. Others were respected for their intensity, their genius. But to Sally, they were something else entirely. They were lessons she never asked to learn. And the hardest truth? These experiences didn't happen once. They happened again and again. And the first one shattered her heart in a way fame could never repair. For years, people asked why Sally never spoke up. The answer is simpler and darker than most realize. In Hollywood, especially then, gratitude was mandatory. You didn't complain, you didn't confront, you were lucky just to be there. Sally learned early that speaking honestly came with consequences. A reputation, fewer calls, closed doors disguised as scheduling conflicts. So she swallowed it. She told herself endurance was strength, that professionalism meant absorbing discomfort quietly. And she wasn't alone. Silence was the unspoken contract many actors signed without realizing it. Sally carried that weight through award seasons, box office hits, and glowing interviews. Each smile felt earned, but also costly. The stories didn't fade with time, they sharpened, and age gave her something Hollywood never did: permission, not to attack, not to accuse, but to tell the truth without asking for approval. What she finally shared wasn't driven by anger, it was clarity. And clarity led her back to the man who hurt her first. The one the world adored. The one who taught her that charm could cut deeper than cruelty. To the public, it was magic. Two stars glowing on screen, their chemistry effortless, playful, unforgettable. Audiences believed they were witnessing a real love story unfolding in front of the camera. The films sparkled, the interviews flirted, and Hollywood happily sold the illusion. But behind closed doors, Sally's experience was painfully different. What looked like romance from the outside felt isolating from within. She later admitted she often felt unseen, like she was present but not truly acknowledged. Compliments came with conditions. Warmth vanished without warning. Conversations ended before they began. The charm everyone praised didn't disappear. It just wasn't meant for her. What fans interpreted as confidence, Sally experienced as dismissal. The imbalance slowly became impossible to ignore. She wasn't treated as an equal partner, but as an accessory orbiting someone else's spotlight. And the most confusing part? She wanted it to work. She believed it could. That hope made everything hurt more, because when affection feels conditional, it leaves scars that linger long after the applause fades. The man the world adored had a way of lighting up rooms, but Sally learned that same charm could turn sharp in private. It wasn't shouting or open hostility, it was subtler. Ideas brushed aside, praise given to everyone else, silence when support was needed most. Over time, she realized the warmth she chased was never guaranteed. It had to be earned, again and again, and even then, it could vanish in a glance or a pause that lasted too long. Rehearsals felt heavier than they should have. Scenes that should have felt electric carried an unspoken tension. Sally described feeling like she was constantly walking a line, careful not to disrupt the fragile balance. She remained professional, patient, even affectionate when she could be. But the emotional cost added up. Loving someone who quietly diminishes you leaves a deeper mark than open cruelty ever could. Years later, she admitted the truth plainly. She loved him, and that love hurt more than anything else that followed. The heartbreak didn't end loudly, it ended quietly, with scars she carried alone. Time never softened what happened. It only clarified it. While the world moved on, celebrating his legend, Sally processed what the relationship had taken from her. She didn't rewrite history. She didn't deny the affection. She simply told the truth. Love doesn't excuse harm. The experience taught her something brutal but lasting. Success doesn't protect you from emotional damage. Fame doesn't shield you from being made to feel small. And the brightest stars can cast the darkest shadows on the people closest to them. She didn't seek revenge. She sought honesty. And once that door opened, more memories followed. Different men, different sets, different forms of harm. Some were cold, some were chaotic, some were calculated, and each one added another layer to a story Hollywood never wanted told. Because the heartbreak that started with love was only the beginning. What came next would show her just how cruel silence can be when it's used as a weapon. Not every wound comes from loud confrontation. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in silence. When Sally Field stepped onto the set with Tommy Lee Jones, she felt it instantly. No greeting, no warmth, not even polite acknowledgement. Just distance so deliberate it felt intentional. For an actress who believed great performances were built on trust and connection, it was deeply unsettling. She tried to bridge the gap at first. A few light comments, questions about the work, even shared observations about their characters. None of it landed. Jones delivered his lines with precision, hit his marks, and retreated behind an emotional wall that never cracked. The silence wasn't awkward. It was dismissive. Acting alongside him felt like performing with a shadow, present, technically flawless, but unreachable. And that absence carried weight, the kind that drains energy scene by scene. Sally later admitted she felt erased, as if her presence barely registered. There was no argument to point to, no explosion to blame, just an emptiness that made collaboration impossible. And that kind of coldness doesn't fade once the cameras stop rolling. It lingers. As filming continued, the consequences of that emotional shutdown became impossible to ignore. Scenes that demanded chemistry fell flat, not because of talent, but because connection was never allowed to exist. Sally found herself carrying moments alone, reacting to someone who refused to meet her halfway. Critics noticed something was off. Reviews questioned the lack of spark, the emotional distance on screen. What audiences never saw was how much effort she poured into filling the void. Acting is dialogue, even in silence. But when one side refuses to engage, the imbalance becomes visible. Sally wasn't battling a difficult personality. She was battling absence. And absence, she realized, can be just as destructive as open hostility. There was no confrontation, no apology, no closure. When the project ended, so did any chance of repair. She never worked with him again. Years later, her words about the experience remained calm, but unmistakably heavy. The silence had spoken loudly enough, and it taught her a painful lesson. Sometimes the most damaging behavior leaves no visible bruise at all. If Tommy Lee Jones embodied emotional distance, Robert Blake represented something far more volatile. From the moment Sally Field shared a set with him, the atmosphere shifted. What should have been creative tension quickly turned into unpredictability. Blake didn't just bend rules, he shattered them without warning. Scripts became suggestions. Rehearsals turned erratic. One moment he followed direction, the next he rewrote scenes on the spot, forcing everyone else to scramble. The instability wasn't exciting, it was exhausting. Crew members braced themselves daily, unsure which version of him would arrive. Sally watched as directors lost control and schedules unraveled. The chaos wasn't artistic rebellion, it was domination through disorder. She later described the experience as standing on unstable ground, never knowing when it would collapse. Creativity can thrive under pressure, but fear suffocates it, and fear was everywhere. What should have been a meaningful project slowly transformed into something unrecognizable. The damage went beyond discomfort. The production itself began to crumble. Delays stacked up. Tension escalated. The constant unpredictability drained everyone involved. Sally carried the emotional weight of her role while navigating an environment that felt unsafe and hostile. What made it worse was the realization that none of it was necessary. The chaos didn't elevate the film, it destroyed it. Eventually, the project collapsed entirely, never reaching the audience it was meant for. For Sally, that loss cut deep, not just professionally, but personally. She later used a word she rarely applied to her career experiences: traumatic. That single word revealed how deeply it affected her. It wasn't about ego clashes or artistic disagreement. It was about enduring behavior that crossed boundaries and left lasting scars. She made a quiet promise to herself after that experience. Some people, no matter how talented, were never worth the cost. On paper, it looked perfect. Two celebrated actresses, a beloved story, a film destined to become iconic. Sharing the screen with Shirley MacLaine should have been a triumph. Instead, it became one of the most draining experiences of Sally's career. Their approaches to acting couldn't have been more different. Sally worked inward, carefully, emotionally. Shirley arrived bold, loud, and commanding attention at every turn. What began as creative contrast quickly turned into a power struggle. Every scene felt like a contest rather than collaboration. Sally sensed it early, the imbalance, the need to dominate the room. She stayed focused, committed to the story, believing the work would speak for itself. But tension simmered just beneath the surface, growing heavier with each passing day. What the audience would later see as seamless drama was forged in exhaustion and restraint, and the most painful clash was still ahead. The tension with Shirley MacLaine finally reached its breaking point during what should have been one of the most emotionally restrained scenes in the film. Silence mattered. Stillness mattered. Sally approached it with careful control, knowing the power came from what wasn't said, but take after take, the moment unraveled. Shirley added comments. Sarcasm slipped in. Emotional beats were undercut before they could land. 17 takes later, the exhaustion was visible. Not because Sally faltered, but because the scene kept being pulled in a different direction. To the audience, the final cut delivered tears. To Sally, it carried the memory of fighting to protect the truth of the moment while feeling overridden at every turn. It wasn't about ego, it was about respect. Years later, there was no warmth in how she recalled it, only clarity. Two legends shared the screen, but only one felt diminished by the encounter. If stories like this change how you see Hollywood, take a moment to like and subscribe for more untold truths behind iconic films. And let me ask you this. Do you think clashes like these are unavoidable when strong personalities collide? Or were they a sign of something deeper in the industry? With James Woods, the damage didn't come from chaos or volume. It came from precision. From the first table read, Sally sensed something was off. Woods was sharp, analytical, always several steps ahead, and he made sure everyone knew it. His intelligence dominated the room, but instead of lifting the work, it narrowed it. Dialogue was dissected publicly. Choices were questioned in front of others. Suggestions arrived wrapped as judgments. Sally later admitted it wasn't the role that drained her. It was the constant need to defend her instincts. Acting requires vulnerability, but vulnerability doesn't survive under interrogation. Woods framed his behavior as commitment to excellence. To Sally, it felt like erosion. Little by little, confidence gave way to self-doubt. Not because she lacked ability, but because the environment demanded submission rather than collaboration. Brilliance can inspire, but when it's used to belittle, it becomes something else entirely. Off camera, the tension deepened. Woods had a way of making criticism sound casual, almost friendly, which made it harder to confront. He'd question whether Sally was fully invested, whether her heart was truly in the work. Those comments landed quietly, but they stayed. For an actress who had fought relentlessly to be taken seriously, the implications were corrosive. It wasn't about improving performance, it was about control. Sally pushed through, delivering exactly what the role demanded, but the cost was invisible to everyone except her. By the end of filming, she was exhausted in a way no long shoot had ever left her before. She walked away with a resolution she would never abandon again. No performance was worth being made to feel small. Some collaborations end with applause, others end with clarity. This one ended with both, but only one of them mattered. Dustin Hoffman didn't need a full production to leave a mark. One audition was enough. Sally entered the room hopeful, prepared, ready to work. Hoffman was already in command, joking with producers, setting the tone before she spoke a word. When the reading began, he interrupted her mid-line, corrected her delivery, questioned her instincts openly. It wasn't collaboration, it was dismantling. She later said it felt like she wasn't being tested for chemistry, but for endurance. Each interruption chipped away at her confidence while everyone watched. The imbalance was unmistakable. When the audition ended, Sally walked out shaken, questioning herself in a way she rarely had before. The wound deepened when she later learned Hoffman bragged about sabotaging the session, claiming there was no chemistry, and ensuring there wouldn't be. Time eventually brought clarity. The failure wasn't hers, but the humiliation stayed. Looking back, Sally Field doesn't frame these stories as revenge. She frames them as truth. Different men, different dynamics, the same outcome. Each experience reinforced a pattern Hollywood normalized for decades. Power exercised without accountability. Fame didn't protect her. Talent didn't shield her. Silence only prolonged the damage. Now, with nothing left to prove, she tells these stories not to tear legends down, but to show what survival really looked like behind the spotlight. Success came with scars no award could erase. And while audiences celebrated the performances, the real strength was what happened off-screen. Enduring, learning, and eventually choosing honesty. These weren't isolated moments. They were chapters in a career built not just on talent, but resilience. And once the silence broke, it became impossible to ignore how many stories like hers were hidden in plain sight. When Sally Field finally looked back at these experiences together, something unsettling emerged. These weren't isolated clashes or unlucky pairings. They formed a pattern. Different personalities, different projects, yet the same imbalance repeated itself. Silence used as control. Intelligence turned into intimidation. Charm masking dismissal. Chaos excused as genius. Hollywood didn't just allow these behaviors, it rewarded them. Sally realized that what hurt most wasn't any single man's actions, but how normal they were treated as being. No alarm sounded, no one intervened. The industry quietly absorbed the damage and moved on. She learned that professionalism often meant endurance, not fairness, and that realization reframed her entire career. Success wasn't just about talent or luck. It was about how much a person was willing to tolerate without breaking. For Sally, survival came at the cost of years of unspoken strain. And the clarity that arrived later was impossible to dismiss. Hollywood loves one label above all others: agreeable. Sally Field wore it proudly for years, believing kindness and cooperation were strengths. But she slowly learned how easily those traits could be exploited. Being easy to work with often meant being easy to overlook, easy to interrupt, easy to diminish. Each time she absorbed disrespect quietly, it reinforced a dangerous expectation that she would adapt, that she would stay pleasant, that she would not push back. The price of that expectation was emotional exhaustion no one saw. Sally didn't lose roles because she lacked talent. She lost pieces of herself trying to preserve harmony. Only later did she understand that speaking up wasn't unprofessional. Staying silent was. That realization came with age, distance, and reflection. And once she accepted it, she stopped framing her past as personal failure. It was systemic, and it demanded honesty. Timing matters. Sally didn't choose this moment randomly. She chose it because the world finally knows how to listen. Conversations about power, respect, and silence have reshaped how audiences view old legends. What was once dismissed as difficult behavior is now questioned. Sally's stories resonate not because they're shocking, but because they feel familiar. Viewers recognize the dynamics, the quiet undermining, the imbalance disguised as brilliance. By speaking now, she adds weight to a cultural shift that refuses to excuse harm for talent. These stories don't rewrite history, they complete it. They remind us that icons are human and that success often hides uncomfortable truths. Sally didn't need vindication. She needed space to tell her story honestly, and the world was finally ready to hear it. Awards came, applause followed, careers soared, but none of it erased what lingered beneath the surface. Sally Field achieved what many only dream of: critical acclaim, longevity, respect. Yet those victories didn't undo the moments she felt invisible, undermined, or humiliated. Hollywood celebrates outcomes, not endurance. It applauds the final performance, not the emotional toll required to deliver it. Sally's strength wasn't just in what she accomplished, but in what she survived without losing herself entirely. Looking back, she doesn't deny her success. She contextualizes it. Achievement didn't cancel pain. It coexisted with it. And that truth matters, because it reframes what making it really means. Not perfection, not happiness, but resilience. In the end, Sally Field's story isn't about grudges. It's about reckoning, about acknowledging how silence shaped her journey just as much as talent did. The industry thrived on what wasn't said, on what was tolerated, on who stayed quiet. By finally speaking, Sally didn't tear Hollywood down. She illuminated it. Her truth doesn't demand outrage. It demands reflection. How many stories like hers were buried under smiles and awards? How many careers survived only because someone endured quietly? Sally's honesty doesn't diminish her legacy, it deepens it, because it reminds us that behind every polished performance is a human being navigating forces far more complex than the script ever reveals. When Sally Field finally allowed herself to name these experiences for what they were, the number no longer mattered as much as the pattern behind it. 7 men, 7 encounters, each different in tone but unified by imbalance. None of them defined her career, yet all of them shaped it in ways she couldn't see at the time. Hollywood framed these men as icons, geniuses, forces of nature. Sally saw them as people who wielded power without regard for its impact. Her reflections weren't fueled by bitterness. They were measured, restrained, and precise. That restraint made them more powerful. These weren't stories told for shock value. They were truths released once silence stopped serving a purpose. In naming what she endured, Sally reclaimed something that had been quietly taken from her: authorship of her own narrative. The industry may have written the headlines, but she finally wrote the footnotes that explained everything the spotlight never showed. For years, Sally believed surviving Hollywood meant succeeding in it, showing up, delivering, smiling through discomfort. But time revealed the difference. Survival is endurance, success is fulfillment, and the two rarely arrive together. Sally achieved acclaim while carrying unresolved weight that no award could lift. She didn't fail because she endured. She endured because the system demanded it. That distinction mattered. It freed her from self-blame. The strength audiences admired on screen mirrored a strength forged off camera, where no applause existed. Looking back, she no longer confuses resilience with obligation. She recognizes that survival came at a cost, one that shouldn't be romanticized. And by saying that out loud, she challenges the myth that suffering is the price of greatness. It never was. It was simply normalized. Sally's honesty forces a reconsideration of how power operates in Hollywood. Talent alone never held control. Reputation did. Influence did. And silence preserved it. By speaking now, Sally disrupts a long-standing equation: brilliance excusing behavior. Her story reframes power not as dominance but responsibility, not as intimidation but collaboration. She doesn't argue that difficult moments can't happen in creative spaces. She argues they shouldn't be excused when they cause harm. The difference is accountability. That distinction changes everything. These reflections don't ask viewers to reject beloved films or performances. They ask them to see the full picture, to understand that admiration doesn't require denial, and that respect for art should never come at the expense of the people who create it. When the roles fade and the applause quiets, what remains is legacy. For Sally Field, that legacy extends far beyond her filmography. It lives in the honesty she chose after decades of restraint, in the clarity she gained when she no longer needed approval. Her truth adds dimension to her work rather than diminishing it. It reveals the depth behind performances that once seemed effortless. Strength isn't just what an audience sees, it's what an actor carries into every scene. Sally's willingness to revisit uncomfortable memories doesn't tarnish her image. It strengthens it because it shows courage not rooted in defiance, but in reflection. And that kind of courage lasts longer than fame ever could. Hollywood thrives on illusion. Perfect moments, perfect people, perfect stories. Sally Field's journey reminds us that reality is always more complex. Behind the smiles were compromises, behind the success were silent battles, and behind the legends were behaviors rarely questioned until now. Her story doesn't ask for sympathy, it asks for awareness. The spotlight shows us who shines. It rarely shows us who pays the price. By finally telling her story, Sally didn't rewrite her past. She reframed it, and in doing so, she gave voice to countless others who learned early that silence was safer than truth. Now, that silence is breaking, and what replaces it isn't scandal, it's understanding.